Lesbian Love in Prison. Part 3. Where the Heart Finds Its Way Home. The morning they told Maya that Reina had been transferred to solitary confinement, she felt something inside her chest collapse like a building falling in slow motion. Not all at once, but floor by floor, wall by wall, until nothing was left standing. She pressed her back against the cold concrete of cell block D and told herself to breathe, just breathe. But her lungs had forgotten how. 3 months they had built something sacred inside those walls. 3 months of stolen glances across the cafeteria, of fingers brushing during yard time, of whispered words in the dark that meant more than anything either. Of them had said in their lives outside. And now in the span of a single announcement from a bored corrections officer who didn't even look up from his clipboard, all of it was separated by steel and silence. Maya had come to Westfield Correctional on a charge that felt like someone else's life. A conviction tied to a man she had loved too blindly. A man who had used her loyalty like a weapon and then left her to hold the consequences alone. She had arrived broken in the way that women arrive when they have spent years making themselves small for someone who never deserved them. Her eyes were always cast downward in those first weeks. She ate alone, slept facing the wall, and counted the days not because she believed in the future, but because counting gave her something to do with her mind besides remember. The other women noticed her quietness. Most interpreted it as weakness. Reina interpreted it as something else entirely. Reina had been in Westfield for 2 years before Maya arrived. She was not the loudest woman in the block, but she had a kind of presence that rooms adjusted to the way a fire doesn't announce itself but changes the temperature of everything around it. She had been convicted for a crime committed in desperation, the kind of desperation that comes from poverty and exhaustion and a system that offers no safety nets, only consequences. She had made peace with her sentence in the way that strong people make peace with things they cannot change. Not by forgetting the pain, but by deciding that the pain would not be the last word. She had built a small life inside the walls. She read every book in the prison library twice. She taught other women to write letters to their children. She kept a tiny drawing of a sunrise that she had made with a broken, colored pencil and taped to the inside of her bunk, because she said it reminded her that something always came after the dark. When Reina first noticed Maya, she didn't approach her. She simply started leaving small things in her path. A book placed at the edge of the common table that Reina knew Maya would walk past. A second portion of cornbread slid quietly across the tray during a moment of cafeteria chaos. Nothing that could be called attention. Nothing that demanded anything. Just small, deliberate acts of noticing someone who believed herself invisible. Maya noticed. She didn't know at first what to do with being seen. She had spent so many years being unseen by the one person she thought should have seen her most clearly. Being seen by a stranger felt like standing in sudden sunlight after a very long winter, disorienting and warm at the same time. Their friendship built itself in the quiet spaces between the hard hours of prison life. They talked during yard time, at first about small things, books, memories of food they missed, places they'd once been and places they'd dreamed of going. Reina had a laugh that started low and then grew like something she couldn't contain, and the first time she made Maya laugh, really laugh from somewhere deep and real, Maya put her hand over her own mouth, like she had forgotten she was allowed to make that sound. Something was shifting between them, and both women knew it, though neither said it directly for weeks. There was a tenderness in how Reina listened, leaning forward with her whole body, her eyes never drifting to something more interesting, because nothing was more interesting to her than what Maya was saying. And there was something in how Maya began to hold herself differently when Reina was near. Straighter, softer, more present inside her own skin. The first time they held hands, it was during a thunderstorm that knocked out the auxiliary lights for 40 minutes. They were sitting on the floor of the common room with 20 other women, and the darkness made the world smaller and less frightening. And Reina reached over and found Maya's hand in the dark and simply held it. And Maya turned her face away so no one would see her crying. Though in the dark no one could have seen anything at all, that was the moment Maya understood what was happening inside her. Not with fear, not with confusion, but with a deep and quiet recognition, the feeling of finally arriving somewhere after having been lost for a very long time. But prison is not a place built for tenderness. The guards who noticed their closeness began to watch them with the kind of attention that felt like punishment waiting to happen. Another inmate, bitter and volatile, reported them to the block supervisor after witnessing a moment that was entirely innocent. A forehead rested briefly against a shoulder during a hard afternoon. The investigation was swift and humiliating. They were separated, monitored, and warned. And then Reina, who had spoken back when spoken to with cruelty, who had refused to bow her head to an officer who had degraded her in front of others, was sent to solitary as a message, not just to her, but to Maya and to every woman watching. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Maya's sentence. The block felt hollowed out without Reina. She stopped going to the common room. She ate only enough to keep herself upright. She lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling and had long, one-sided conversations with Reina in her head, saying all the things she hadn't said when she'd had the chance. That Reina had given her something back that she thought she'd lost forever. That being loved quietly and consistently by someone is the rarest and most precious thing in the world. That she had arrived in Westfield, believing herself to be someone whose best days were behind her, and that Reina had made her believe, slowly and stubbornly, that she was wrong. She wrote these things down in letters she was not allowed to send, filling pages in a composition notebook until her hand ached, because writing them was the only way to keep them real. What Maya did not know was that Reina, in the bare white silence of solitary, was doing the same thing. She was writing. Letters, pages, fragments, and all of it addressed to Maya. All of it kept folded inside the waistband of her uniform because it was the only private place she had. Reina had known love before, the romantic kind, but she had known it only in its complicated and painful forms. Love that came attached to conditions and expectations and eventual departure. What she felt for Maya was different. It was not desperate or consuming. It was patient and certain, the way you feel certain about the changing of seasons, not because you can see it happening, but because you know in your bones that it is true. In solitary, stripped of everything, she held on to that certainty like a rope in water. When Reina was finally released back into general population after 23 days, she walked into the common room and across the floor toward Maya without hesitating. And Maya stood up from her chair, and the room watched as two women who had been through something real simply looked at each other for a long moment, not touching, not speaking, just standing in the same space again like two people who had walked separately through the same storm and found each other on the other side of it. Someone in the room started to say something cutting, and another inmate, a large, quiet woman named Doris, who had watched everything from the beginning, simply said one word, low and final, and the cutting word stopped. The room returned to its noise, and Maya and Reina sat down together, and Reina put her letters on the table between them, and Maya did the same, and neither of them read what the other had written right then. They just let the pages sit there like proof, like evidence that distance had not been the end of anything. If you believe in kindness, if you believe that love is worth holding on to even inside the hardest places, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the heart does not stop being capable of love just because life has put it in a difficult place. Your support tells us to keep sharing these stories. And every single one of you who watches matters more than you know. What followed was not simple. The road inside those walls never became easy. They were watched and restricted, and there were days when the weight of the place pressed down on both of them in ways that tested everything. But they had something now that neither of them had understood how to hold before. They had the knowledge, proven through separation and silence, and the kind of longing that clarifies everything, that what existed between them was real, not a distraction, not a product of circumstance, not something that would dissolve the moment the gates opened. Real in the way that very few things in either of their lives had ever been real. Maya began to write again, not just letters to Reina, but a kind of journal, a record of what it felt like to be inside this strange chapter of her life and to find, against all reasonable expectation, something that looked remarkably like grace. Reina continued her classes with the other women, teaching writing and reading, but now Maya sat beside her and helped, and the two of them together created something in that room that the women who attended it would later describe, in their own letters home, as the closest thing to school they'd ever actually wanted to attend. They were building something, Not just between themselves, but around themselves. A small ecosystem of care inside a place designed to offer none. The sunrise drawing that had lived inside. Reina's bunk for 2 years was eventually joined by a second one, drawn by Maya, rougher and less practiced but full of color she had mixed by borrowing every broken pencil from every woman willing to lend one. She gave it to Reina one evening without ceremony, just pressed it into her hands and looked at her. And Reina looked at it for a long time and then back at Maya. And what passed between them in that look was the kind of communication that doesn't need language, because it has already said everything, in every way possible. Before this story ends, we want to ask you something from the heart. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever found unexpected love or kindness in a place you never expected? Your story matters, and this community is built on the truth that real experiences connect us more powerfully than anything else ever could. Maya did not know as she sat that evening watching. Reina pinned the second sunrise beside the first on the inside of her bunk. That in 4 months she would receive news about a case review, that the details of her conviction were being reconsidered, that a door she had long stopped believing in was quietly beginning to open. She did not know any of that yet. What she knew was this, that the woman beside her had walked through the same darkness and chosen, every single day, to keep drawing sunrises. And that in learning to love Reina, she had learned something about herself that no sentence, no wall, no locked door could ever take back. She had learned that she was still someone worth knowing, still someone capable of a love that was whole and honest and entirely her own. And in that small, fluorescent-lit cell, with 2 hand-drawn sunrises taped side by side on the wall, that truth was enough. That truth was everything.